And is Sharon supposed to be the co-host, or was it me, Melissa?
You'll be host when she gives it back, and I'll remain
Okay.
the co-host the entire time.
Very good. That's right, Melissa. Okay. Hi, everybody. We're about to start our live event. Welcome to all of you. Hi, Vicki. Hi, Hillary.
Hi.
Hi, Christy and Kristen and Kip.
Oh,
Don Yannetti. Oh, Karen, there's too many people for me to list. Hi, Christine, Joanne. We're going to start live here in 1 minute. So Sharon, you're the co-host.
Yes.
Okay. And that's all we needed to do, right, Sharon?
Yes. The slide's up, and we're just waiting for Melissa to give you host back.
You are host, Russ. We are live, everyone, and we're good to go.
Okay, great. Welcome everybody to Get Set Up special event, career and industry disruption due to COVID-19. My name's Russ Eanes. I'm a guide at Get Set Up, and I'm going to be your host today. As a community of active older adults who are looking to stay connected, Get Set Up's thrilled to have Marc with us to discuss what the pandemic has done to careers and industries and maybe what we can do about it. Before we get started today, I want to cover just a few housekeeping items. For those tuning in live through our Get Set Up Zoom class, please remember to mute yourself during the heart of the workshop, but do keep your cameras on if you're comfortable so we can enjoy connecting with each other and that we can capture some images to share in the future. If anyone has a clarifying question while Marc is speaking, please let us know in the chat and we'll do our best to call those questions his attention in real time. We'll also leave time at the end to take questions directly to you for Marc in the second half of our hour. For those joining via our community live streams on Get Set Up TV or on Facebook or on YouTube, you're welcome to enter questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to get to everyone's questions. And now on to our special guest. Marc Miller is the founder of Career Pivot, which helps those in the second half of life design careers that they can grow into for the next 30 years. And Marc, make sure today you define what that second half of life is. Marc authored the book Repurpose Your Career, a practical guide for the second half of life, the second edition of which was published in September 2019, and I've got a copy here myself. He's also the podcast host of the award-winning Repurpose Your Career podcast. Marc calls himself a recovering engineer. You have to define that also, Marc. A multi-potentialite. Better define that one too. And a professional career changer, as he's made 16 career pivots over the last 40 plus years. Marc and his wife Lotus became expats in June of 2018 when they moved to Ajijic, Mexico. He also works remotely from there. And you can learn more about Marc, Career Pivot, Repurpose Your Career podcast, and their journey, Marc and Lotus's journey to becoming expats by visiting careerpivot.com. And I've also got to say, as I make a special welcome to Marc to Get Set Up, I'm also a member of Career Pivot. That's how I know Marc. I've been a member of Career Pivot for over 2 years and have really found it tremendously helpful at this phase of my life. So I'm glad to have Marc here today. I've got a whole bunch of questions here for Marc. And so why don't we launch into those questions? And again, if any of you have questions along the way, make sure you stick them in the chat so we can pull those questions. Marc, your story. Tell us a bit how you came to start Career Pivot and why.
sure. And hello to everyone.
Yes, I am a recovering engineer. There's a 12-step program for that. I spent 22 years at IBM right out of college. I joke I went to work for the Borg. I wandered around a lot in those 22 years, was a programmer, an engineer, IT guy. I was a trainer. I was a sales guy. I was a consultant. I was in marketing. I made a lot of changes. IBM in 99 screwed me in my pension. So I went and said, bye-bye, went to work for a successful tech startup, a semiconductor startup. In 2002, I had a near fatal bicycle accident. Yes, I hit a car head on at 50 miles an hour. And that was what I first call one of my first moments of clarity. Obviously, I lived. And actually, I wasn't badly hurt. I tore up a knee, I broke a hip, I dislocated a shoulder, broke a bunch of ribs, broke the clavicle, had imprints of the pads, the helmet in my head, but I had no internal injuries and no brain injuries I'm willing to admit to. I spent 5 days at the trauma center. They had me walking on crutches in 3 days. I was back in a bike in 10 weeks, flying back to China in 4 months. And that was November of 2002. And I flew right into Guangdong province, which was the epicenter of SARS-V1. So this is deja vu for me this last year. I then went off and laid myself off to high school math for 2 years. I couldn't do that and stay healthy, although I was highly successful. I then did a year of nonprofit work. I then realized I can't do that. I was good at it, and then I got sucked up into another startup. And it was in the 2007, 8, 9 timeframe when I'm working for the predecessor to Zoom. And I am seeing all the folks who were at my job club, and I was heavily involved with a job club in Austin, Texas. And I was wondering, why does no one really writing about careers for folks our age? And the answer was, we're all going to retire. Well, by the way, the vast majority of us can't afford to retire. So many of us are going to have to continue to work. And as Russ and a lot of other people have seen who are in my online community, we want to work on our terms. And we may not want to keep on doing what we used to do. And so my wife and I picked up and moved to Mexico in October of 2016, we got our October surprise, and no, it has nothing to do with Hillary Clinton. We got our health insurance bill and it exploded, went up 80%. And we said, we're going to get out of here. So that's my story, and I'm sticking by it.
Tell me a little bit more about, or us a bit more about starting Career Pivot.
Well, I started it when I came out of my second tech startup, and I was burned out. And I was looking at saying, okay, I said, I'm an engineer. I've made all these career shifts. So I went and looked at how did I do it? And a couple of different things. I'm a Berkman consultant. I use the Berkman assessment with a lot of clients. And I learned that I had turned myself into something I was not. I had turned myself into a geek that could speak. I convinced myself I was an extrovert. I am not. I claim that many of us, when we started our careers, we became actors. And at least for me, when I hit my 50s, I found staying in role and in character to be exhausting. And I ran that as a traditional coaching practice until I hit when we decided we wanted to go live someplace else. And I said, how can I work with more people at a much lower price? And that's coming up with a membership model, which is Russ is one of my members.
So here's an interesting thing, Mark. Career pivot can really apply to anyone at any age once you make a career pivot. But my observation is career pivot tends to have older workers in the second half of life. Give us a definition of that second half of life. But what age are we looking at?
Well, For most of us, there is usually some period where life changes. It may be when all the kids get out of the house. It may be when we pay off the mortgage. It may be when we reach the point where we're going, I don't want to do this anymore. Now, for most of us, that tends to come, somewhere in the 40s and 50-year range. I had Jonathan Rausch, who wrote the Happiness Curve book. And he talks about the fact that as we reach our bottom of happiness, somewhere around our mid-40s, and then it's all up from there. And so it's when we realize that, wow, I have choices. I don't have to keep on doing this. Because a lot of us chose what we did in our career either by chance. In my case, I did what my parents told me to do, was to go be an engineer and go work for a big father-like company. Or other people just fell into it. So it's in that 50-year range. And if you look at our community, which has about 45 members in it right now, the average age is probably about 60, and the youngest is probably 49, 50.
So let's switch questions here a minute. Let me ask you about disruptions that you're seeing in jobs and industries right now. And let's separate those disruptions into just the normal disruptions, which I don't like to call them normal, but what's been happening for the last 2 to 3 decades with work. And the other disruption would be the things caused by the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, there's always been creative destruction. As new technologies come in, old things are destroyed. The most classic example is, Kodak. By the way, Kodak back in the 1970s, they were in the film business. By the way, they created the first digital camera. They couldn't understand how anybody would want to look at their pictures on TV. And by 2000 and 2001, they actually were the #2 digital camera manufacturer in the world. By the way, they lost $60 in every camera. And by 2012, they went bankrupt.
So they created the disruption that destroyed them.
Yes. Then look what Amazon's doing today. Amazon just started out creating, a marketplace for books. And this is a class example and kind of flowing into what's going now. Amazon's a classic example in the fact that we've had the digital revolution going on for a long time, 20 years. The reality is the pandemic has shifted that into overdrive because, well, look what we're doing. We're all on Zoom. I said, I was at the predecessor to Zoom 10 years ago, and we thought all kinds of stuff was going to take off, and it didn't for a variety of reasons that we can talk about. But just look at the shift. We've had companies that said, we can't have a remote workforce. They're all become a bunch of slackers. And you know what? It's kind of worked. It's not perfect. That wouldn't have happened without the pandemic. So I kind of look at right now in the jobs market, there's a huge disconnect. If you look at this last week, we had the jobs report, and it was, 200,000 new jobs, and everyone was expecting 1 million. And they say, well, why is that? Well, there are 2 real reasons for it. Number one, there are more job postings today than there was pre-pandemic. The problem is 95% of those are for in-person jobs. What are most of us at our age looking for? We want to work remote. The second piece is a lot of those in-person jobs, we have a huge segment of the population, i.e. women, who have left the job market because they're home taking care of their kids, taking care of their parents, taking care of a spouse. Without childcare and schools being open, by the way, a lot of people aren't going to go back to work. So we've got that disconnect between what employers are looking for and then what particularly folks our age, and I turned 65 this month, what we're looking for. And there was a really excellent Wall Street Journal podcast talking about the fact there are 3 industries that have just done incredibly well in the pandemic. Number 1, online retail and everything associated with it. And this is not just buying stuff, but it's getting stuff to you. I mean, that has just exploded. So distribution, shipping, warehousing, the working for one of the shipping companies, UPS, USPS, FedEx. I mean, they're going gangbusters. They need people. What are most of those jobs? They're in person. Okay, the second one is anything to do with residential retail, residential housing. As someone who's going to sell their condo right now, in Austin, Texas, where I'm sitting right now, is that has exploded. If you're working for Home Depot, if you are a plumber, electrician, you are a home remodeler, you're putting in pools, you're busier than you've probably ever been. And the third is manufacturing. And again, on the one Wall Street Journal podcast, and I'll make sure you guys get a link to this. They talk about they interviewed the CEO of Generac, home backup generators. He's out of Wisconsin. He can't find workers. It's a combination of he's not paying enough, and he keeps on raising his wages. But 2, it's all in person. So the challenge is, will that continue? The answer is, I don't know. So one of the things that you may want to look at is, where has industry been disrupted? And I take this industry disruption into 3 categories. One is supply chain. And I'll use the classic example. Russ and I have talked before. We're cyclists, right? I bought a brand new Trek bicycle at Christmas, and I went into Guadalajara. And by the way, I'm 6'3", so I ride a size 60 bicycle. And they had one, I think I found the only size 60 bicycle in all of Mexico. And in fact, I brought my Bianchi size 60 bike, the 20-year-old. I brought it back to Texas to donate it, because no one will ride it in Mexico. So the number of people my size is very few. And so I said, well, can I order something? And they said, no. Why not? Well, every bike frame in the world is manufactured in China. And right now, there is a massive, and I mean, when I talk about big, massive shortage of shipping containers. Now, it's not that there's a shortage of them worldwide. They're just not in Asia. And this all started with the Trump tariffs, where basically the Chinese and many Asian countries stopped buying from us, but we kept on buying from them. And then the pandemic hit, and this is just exacerbated. So right now, there's an article in the Seattle Times where there are shipments going into Seattle, and they are turning those empty shipping containers around so fast that they can't fill them with apples, because the apple growers up in the Washington Pacific Northwest, they sell a lot of product to Asia. They can't get them into the shipping containers fast enough to get them back. The shipping containers are worth so much. So so one of the things in your career, if you are in just the supply chain problems affect just about everyone. Another good example right now with supply chain is anyone trying to build a house. Wood has gotten super expensive. Well, you realize that there's more white pine being harvested pretty much in the history of the country, and there's a shortage of lumber. The reason is all the sawmills shut down in the Great Recession, and then a bunch more shut down last year. And now we can't, the cost of lumber has gone up 4 times. So one of the things that you need to be looking at is, how does this supply chain problem affect you and what you do? The second that you need to look at is buying habits. I'll make a wager of the 40 or 50 folks on this call, I'll make a wager a lot of you now shop for your groceries online. Who did that a year ago? Like nobody. So have you bought groceries online, Russ?
I actually am one of those that doesn't. I like to get out of the house. I need to get out of the house.
Well, when I went back to Austin last September, I had meetings with about 10 people, and they all had not left the house in 6 months. So it's one of these deals of where, wow. So you have things like Amazon, Walmart, in Texas, HEB, building what they were referring to as dark warehouses or dark grocery stores. These are grocery stores that people don't ever go into. It's completely changing the way the way the grocery business is being done. We are seeing similar. There's a now thing called dark kitchens, where you're taking an old Ruby Tuesdays, gutting it, filling it up with kitchen space for 8 or 10 restaurants, where all they do is takeout and delivery. Who would have thought that?
Let me ask you a question here, Mark.
Sure.
With all this disruption going on,
Yep.
we have our learners tend to be older, so
Yes.
55 and older, probably 60 and older. How would you advise someone who's thinking of making a career change, or maybe making a second half career move, not just a change, but like launch into something pretty new? But with all the disruption going on, what kind of advice would you give to an older person who's thinking about that versus a younger person?
The first thing is to figure out what the disruption is, and then what the opportunity is. Because not all the disruption has been bad. I mean, the classic example is, look what we're doing here. One of the things that's changed this last year is regulatory changes. So HIPAA has, you can now go visit your doctor over FaceTime or Zoom. One of the things that we've seen is in drug and alcohol rehab, results have actually improved pretty dramatically, because you don't have this, you can go visit your counselor without having to walk into an office. So the first thing to figure out is, what's the disruption? And then how do you take advantage of that? What are the problems being solved? Or how are things going to be solved? Some of these things will be temporary, but I'll make a wager a lot of them will be permanent. So I want to say, this is almost like going back to when you were in high school. When you're in high school, you didn't know what you didn't know. And so it's kind of saying, okay, where are the opportunities for me to fit in? And what are the problems I can go solve? Or what are the problems that need to be solved? And you probably won't necessarily look at this as strictly a job or full-time employment. Because the one thing that this has changed is, by the way, you can work for anybody, anywhere. I mean, I'm sitting here in Austin. In 2 weeks, I'm going to be back in Ajijic, Mexico. And by the way, my co-author on my book is in Porto, Portugal. I'm talking to my book cover designer right now, and she's in Ghana. And you're going, how do you do it? I was talking to Mommy Sarah. I was going to talk over Facebook Messenger. The capabilities of doing stuff, and part of it is first understanding what the disruption is, and then which of those do you want to go solve? But you got to understand it. And if you need to reskill, Get Set Up is a good place to start. But then there are places like edx.org, which is a giant clearinghouse for university classes from MIT and Harvard and University of Texas. And by the way, most of those courses are the 4-letter F word, free. It has never been easier to reskill. But the point there is you got to want to.
Right. And we have like over 300 classes you can take, and you can take them again and again. So if you want to learn how to use Word, you could take the class every week until you master it, and practice it on the side if you wanted to. So what I hear you is there's kind of like two different big changes happening right now. One is a lot of face-to-face, I want to call in the flesh jobs. There's a big need for those.
Yes.
There's a shortage of those kind of workers. And then the other one is that there's a lot of shift to remote working, and that's going to vary. But in many cases, older workers may not be used to, they may not have the skills. So I'll give an example. I'm a fairly skilled person with technology, but I just used Zoom. I wasn't real super skilled at it. And about a year ago, through Career Pivot, actually, we had a session one evening. And that's, by the way, I'll come back to why be part of a career group. One thing I learned in Career Pivot was we had a special session on how to make a remote presentation. And I learned that audio was more important than video. And so I was, as an author, all my author events had been scheduled for the book that had been recently released. I mean, had been canceled. All the scheduled events had been canceled. And so I did all my events. I moved them online. So that was a skill I had to learn. That eventually led to where I'm sitting here today, which is kind of one thing to another. I'm teaching classes online. Can you give me some examples of the types of skills you would recommend an older worker get that would help them prepare for, I mean, since we can't be sure what disruption is going to last or change, what are some particular skills you would recommend someone over 60 to learn to make themselves have multi-potential?
Yes. Well, first thing, doing exactly what we're doing here. I mean, right now, I'm not in my office, so you may see a little bit of shining off the top of my head. I don't have optimal lighting. You have really good lighting. Learning something about lighting, audio. So Russ has got one of the two microphones I recommend. I think you've got the Samsung microphone. I have an ATR 2100. These are not expensive. They're about $60. They plug into the USB port in your computer. And yes, audio is more important. So just simply, and like right now, if you look at Russ, notice that Russ's head is almost at the top of the screen. And he is almost on a perfect eye-to-eye contact. And part of that is how he is positioned. So learning how to do some of this stuff, and there's lots of courses out there that are very inexpensive. The second is, as you acquire skills, yes, I'm going to recommend you become a publisher. Writing blog posts either for your own, writing in Medium, LinkedIn, as you start trying to position yourself in some place new, is figuring out how can I take my knowledge and put it out there to show that I know what I'm doing. Now I have a podcast. I'm publishing, I think, episode 225 next week. So I've been doing it for over 4 years. By the way, that is doing a podcast. Number one, not expensive. Two, it is the greatest networking tool you'll ever have. I have had the publisher of Forbes on my podcast. I've had Jonathan Rauch, who's a Pulitzer Prize author. I've had all kinds of other people, and I don't have a hard time getting them anymore. In fact, I had Glenn Zweig on my podcast. He has the podcast Art of Excellence. He's just a recruiter out of Atlanta. And he's had, the CEO of Whole Foods, the CEO of Stripe. He had Deepak Chopra. And I said, wow, how do you get all these people? He says, I just go ask. He says, big ones Barack Obama turned me down. He thought he had better things to do. But it's saying, here's what I know, and write it. And you say, but I'm not a writer. By the way, I'm not either. That's why I work with an editor. I have a virtual assistant, which is not expensive. When I've written my books, I've Susan Leahy, who's been my co-author for 9 years now. She takes my crap and fixes it. Now, I am a professional communicator, but I'm not a writer. So if I can do it, anybody can do it, but you probably need to get some help. And there are so many tools out there that I heavily leverage. The one that keeps me out of a lot of trouble is the Grammarly plugin. And by the way, my first job out of college was working for IBM doing word processors. And I worked on some of the early spell checkers, which taught me how to spell. So it's grabbing the skills, it's figuring out what skills you need to acquire and then go get them.
So let's switch here a bit to talk
Sure.
about career pivot or career groups, which I joined about 2.5 years ago after I left my work and was freelancing and was kind of figuring out what to do next. What are the advantages to joining a career group for an older worker?
Okay. Many of us have a lot of belief systems. Okay. We believe the world is such a way. And the reality is, you're wrong. I claim I have a whole chapter in my book on what I call MSU disorder. And MSU stands for make stuff up. We think we know how things are, and being in a career group really helps you stay out of your head and saying, okay, here's what I want to do. What do you think? And Russ has been part of one of our mastermind groups. And by the way, mastermind groups have been around forever. They are typically used by small business, but the idea behind them is you have a group that you can go ask for help. And the idea is you ask help from the mastermind, the group collective. And I've had Russ on my podcast 2 times. And one of the things that Russ said was, these are people who know me who I am today, not what I used to do. And one of the challenges as we move in this stage of life, we've largely framed ourselves on what we used to do. That's our image. I said, when I left technology, and I've left it now twice, I relapsed one time. I was a geek that could speak. I was highly technical. I mean, the last thing I was doing was developing curriculum to explain how video protocols go through corporate firewalls. Oh, I didn't want to do that anymore. But that's how people saw me. And one of the challenges is having a group that gets to know you who you are today, not with the way you've been. And I have a number of testimonials that I play on my podcast, and what they almost all say is there is someone there to help me, to pick me up when I fail and to cheer me when I'm doing well. When someone says, go, go. In fact, just this week, we have David in our community who David is 70. He just won his first city council race. And David was on Facebook Lives and he was on Zoom debates. He'd never done any of this stuff before. And he did a really good job, as much as anything, because he had the confidence that he could do it. In fact, he's starting a podcast. I've had David actually interview somebody on my podcast. Just so that he knows, oh, I can do that. So it's having those groups around you that as Hillary Clinton used to say, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, to make these changes, you ain't going to do it by yourself.
Agreed. I'm going to open it up to questions from our audience in a minute, but before I do that, let me ask you one more question about pivoting careers. What are the risks and the benefits that you would see for someone older, and I'm going to say here 55 or 60 older, in that second half of life, to changing careers, making big changes? Benefits and risks.
Well, number one, I usually don't discourage really huge changes or big changes if you need to maintain an income. That's the concept behind the pivot, is making these incremental changes. Now, I'll use you as an example, Russ. You were working for the Mennonite Church as a book publisher. You finally said, screw it. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep laying people off. And you went to writing your own books, and you were leveraging the skills you already had, just in a different way. That was, I claim, that is what I call a half-step career shift or career change. In other words, you had one foot in the old world, you had one foot in the new world, and you had people helping you along. And I claim almost never will you make these shifts on your own. So the one of the big benefits is, number one, learning who the heck you are. I think one of the things the pandemic has happened to all of us is a time to rethink, what the heck am I doing? Why am I doing this? A really, really good book for this is Necessary Endings by Dr. Henry Cloud. It is what I read about 5 years ago. I asked myself after my October surprise, I was in Austin, Texas. I'd been there not quite 40 years, and going, why am I still here? My son had graduated from college. He and his wife live in DC. I have friends there. My business didn't require me to be there. It gotten really expensive. And boy, it's gotten really expensive this time. And why am I here? And Dr. Cloud talks about the fact that very often for new things to begin, we have to end things. And by the way, in general, we suck at ending things. These are relationships, jobs, careers. I had Kathy Lansford on my podcast. Kathy runs my job club. I say my job club, the Launchpad Job Club back in Austin. And she talked about anchors. We very often have anchors that keep us from moving forward. They may be, our kids are here, or this is where I've always been. I have a house here. I don't want to sell it. I have done. And one of the things to look at is, what are your anchors? And what I quickly found with me was, there's no reason for me to stay. And that's when we started the exploration. And this pandemic has got all of us to or many of us, I won't say all, I can't use all, to reevaluate what's really important in life. Now, the downside is if you really want to make a shift, you're going to have a lot of people tell you, why do you want to do that? You're so good at what you do. You make so much money. Why would you want to do that? And I will never forget, we had a very good friend here in Austin who was a bankruptcy lawyer. He hated his job. He was addicted to the money. And by the way, he died of a heart attack at 68. Essentially killed him. So this is, do you want to live your life, or do you actually want to take your life in a different direction? So that's the downside, is you're going to get a lot of negative talk, particularly if you're good at what you do. And I can't tell you the number of doctors and lawyers I've talked to who say, I don't want to do this, but they get all the negative feedback to say, oh, you can't do that.
So thanks, Mark. That was good advice. So here's a question I've got here. Any advice for getting your loved ones on board if you want to make a pivot that they're not on board with? Oh, good question.
Yes. Is sitting down, being non-judgmental, and understanding truly what their objections are. If you don't understand their objections, because then you can say, okay, some of it's fear, loss of income, loss of status. It's interesting. I teach on another platform a course on how to become an expat. And one of the things that you find is there's usually one person in the couple that drives it. And when they move, it's not uncommon for one to come home. And it isn't always the person who drove it. If you had told me 4 years ago, we would be living in Mexico and my wife is incredibly happy there, I would have said, you're smoking something. I've been all over the world. My wife hasn't. I can culturally integrate just about anywhere. My wife's never learned a foreign language. I used to speak somewhat decent German, and I learned a little bit of Chinese, Mandarin. But you can't make your spouse, you can't make them do anything. But you've got to understand, what are they scared of? Right? It's almost all driven by fear. So getting underneath that.
Yep. And it's important if the spouse or that significant other is part of that support network.
Yes.
You got to do a lot of work with them. Thanks. That's a good answer. Let me open it up now to other questions, and let me request that our audience, if you want to ask a question, why don't you pop a virtual hand up? So you go to your reaction button in your Zoom window and put up a hand. That'll pull you right up to the top of the queue, and I can see you and you can ask your question. You can also put a question in the chat. We'll check it right now for those. We've got still some more time with Mark. It'd be good to ask him some questions. Carolyn, we're going to go ahead and start with your question. You can unmute yourself.
Be a good idea. Oh, it says Shift Command A. Okay.
You're there. We got you, Carolyn.
We got you.
Okay. I just wanted to comment on the fear thing. I read a fabulous book by Susan Forward, and it's called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And she goes through and talks about the fear issues, but then she says, and do it anyway, because most people in life look back and regret what they didn't do, what they didn't take a chance on, instead of what they did, and maybe it didn't turn out quite the way they expected it.
Yeah,
Thanks, Carolyn.
I had Diane Wingert on my podcast. I've had her on twice. And one of the things that she said has stuck with me is you have to be prepared to do something new before you're ready. Because a lot of us grew up with, if you can't do it right, it's not worth doing. And the answer is then you'll never probably do anything new. And I used the example when I started my podcast. My first episodes sucked. They were horrible. The audio quality were not good. By the way, and same similar, I've deleted more blog posts on my website than are there today. I probably double the number of posts have been deleted. And the fact is, you know, we grew up in the generation of failure is not an option. And now if you know, I'm looking at Natalie up there, living in Paris. And the fact is failure is an option. Fail often, fail fast. Just learn something from it each time.
Great. Ellen Sue has got a question, Mark. Go ahead, Ellen Sue. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Like everything you've been saying is totally resonating. And I went out and bought a Blue Yeti mic, and I hired a voiceover coach, and I started writing pieces on Medium. I've got like 17 followers, which is great. But my normal place is business. And even though I've applied for 2 nonprofits, the money, there is a money issue. So while I want to do the creative, the thing that resonated the most was I was actually up for a job in Arizona remotely, but it's the fear of less money. Healthcare is expensive, all of these things. And so I know you're talking about fear, and I'm trying to take the little steps that you're talking about, trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up at 62. But how do you not chase the money down when you really only have maybe so many years to put more into whatever you're going to retire on? I know you want to be yourself, and I know the acting part of what you were talking about.
Yeah.
But how do you strike that balance, I guess?
Yeah, there's not a perfect answer to it. So I'll use the example we picked up and moved to Mexico, where my wife's a retired nurse. She loves her doctors. And I've got some real interesting stories of when she caught COVID in January. And she was texting her endocrinologist back and forth, and people are going, "What? You can do that?" I was emailing my general practitioner. But it's very often start looking at, why do you need the amount of money you need, right? We've downsized twice. One of the things that was very freeing, we first downsized in 2009. We moved out of our house into a condo. And when we moved to Mexico, we got rid of everything. I mean, we 2 trips down in my Subaru Outback, and it's freeing. So truly understanding what you need the money for. Now, I interviewed my podcast several years ago, and my mind's gone blank. The book was End of Jobs, a millennial who just simply went, I go to Thailand twice a year to get my teeth cleaned. He gets all his dental work done someplace else. And start looking at how do you solve this problem, but solve it in a non-traditional way. Because yes, healthcare is a big deal at our age. I'm on Medicare this month. And by the way, Medicare doesn't do me any good outside the country, but I'm still signing up for it. But is going to figuring out, but looking at the whole picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll use the example. We went and visited my brother's family, who I hadn't seen in 20 years. And my sister-in-law's house is filled with stuff. it's filled with stuff. And she couldn't understand how we could pick up and move someplace and get rid of all of our stuff. Hey, Russ.
Very good answer. I hope that helped you, Ellen Sue. We got one more question here. Rosalind, go ahead, unmute yourself, Rosalind.
Okay, hey, Mark, this was an excellent talk. I was wondering, do you have people tell you they get more objections from their children about them changing their lifestyle than anywhere else, your grown children?
Oh, you get all kinds of people push back. And it's not just changing career. I have friends. I have a very good friend, Donna, who her and her boyfriend live in Vanuatu. And she goes back to Austin frequently because her kids think she's crazy. And yes, people will tell you that you're crazy. And what you need to do is do it anyway. Or come up with a good answer. I mean, I went back for my 45th high school reunion back in New Jersey in October of 2019. And I had 5 people who tried to shame me on either Facebook or in person for being crazy for moving to Mexico. It's so dangerous. And I just went and looked at them and said, but you live in the really dangerous place there in New Jersey. And they looked at me and I said, look, there are all the killings in the south side of Chicago, all those gun violence. They said, so that's not close by. I said, well, neither with me. So part of it is similar to who said before, when you get objections, understanding what is their underlying fear. Are they worried about you becoming homeless? Are they worried about your physical safety? They worry about you. What is it they're worried about?
Mostly your health, like
Yes.
we got different things going on. And if you get too far from them, what are you going to do?
And that's what you've got to figure out. By the way, there are a lot of folks our age who never had children. There is a huge group of women who never married. And so one of the things all these people have to deal with is, okay, as you age, who's going to take care of me? And there are a lot of folks out there who have kids who may love them dearly, but they ain't going to take care of you. Because I was the black sheep of my family. And I was the one who ended up having my mother the last 5 years of her life. And the only reason I had her because I didn't put up with her crap. You have to understand, my mother entered Columbia University at the age of 13 in 1931. She was brilliant and a total pain in the butt.
Which is another whole point, Mark. I suppose we could have a session on some of us who are in that second half of life, over 60, and we're still caring for children, grandchildren, and parents.
Yes.
I refer to my wife and me as the club sandwich generation because we're in some way or another caring for 4 generations.
Yes.
Well, this has been great, Mark. I really enjoyed having you. We're nearing the end of our time, and I need to start wrapping things up. We do want to do one.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm so sorry. This is Tracy, and I have a quick question. I was not able to listen to all of it. I'm on the phone. I was driving. I loved what you said. I would love to hear your podcast. Is there going to be a recording of this? Because I didn't get to hear it all.
Don't worry. We're going to have this. This is recorded, and we will also put up the information here at the end about Mark's website, about his book, about Career Pivot podcast. So we'll make sure you get all that information. It's all coming to you. Thanks, though, for asking the question, and thanks for dialing in. And we'll also show you how you can watch this, the recording of this. So
okay, but I will my computer now and put in that please send me information about his podcast. Thank you so much.
We'll get all that to you. Thanks for asking. Before we go, we would like to get a group photo of everyone if we can. So if everyone that is willing to do it would please turn on their camera for just a minute. We'll get a nice photo of everybody. Oh, this is great. So many familiar faces. I know a lot of you.
Now, by the way, when I worked for Life Size, and one of the things I would train, as soon as you turn on the camera, the women would either mess with their hair, take their glasses off. And most of us guys, we're going, what's the big deal? I just want hair.
I wish I had some to mess with. I'll be honest. Great. So let's get that shot, and the tech team will let me know when we've got that group photo.
All set.
All set. Great. Thanks, Natalie. I appreciate it. Well, it's been wonderful having Mark here today and talking to us about career changes, about industry disruption. Boy, we could go on and on about this. It's a big, hot topic. I want to thank the audience who came here and were in the front row seat. That means you weren't just live streaming, but you were sitting here and you got a chance to ask questions. Make sure you do that when you get a chance to take a Get Set Up class. Come and watch it live. Be part of the live audience is what I'm saying. You get to ask questions. If you'd like a recording of this event, you can email the support team at help@getsetup.io. We have information about Mark coming up here, the careerpivot.com. You can go visit, and his podcast, which you can find links to on his website. Get Set Up also has lots more classes for you. You can hear some classes up on the screen about entrepreneurship. So if you're one of those older persons who's thinking, I always wanted to start something, we can help you here at Get Set Up. But if you're an older person, just want to learn some new skill, we got 300 plus classes you can take every week. So they're all designed for you, older adults, older learners, and your teachers, your guides, we're all older too, so we know what it's like to be learning at this age. The entrepreneur classes, please look at those, and if they fit, take them. Otherwise, look at the schedule and see what else you might like to take. We hope we can see all of you in a future class. And check your email for information also about Career Pivot and about any more Get Set Up classes. Again, we hope to see you in some of those classes. We're about out of time today, but thanks everybody for being on. This was a great session. Mark's so good, and there was a lot that we learned. And I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. Thanks for joining us.